and I'd like to welcome you to this to the last event of this 3-day series entitled Rethinking Homosexuality in Islam. Today we have with us Ludovic-Mohamed Zahed, and soon to join us on Skype, Zonneveld. And before I give the floor over to both of them, allow me to introduce the two of them. Ludovic-Mohamed Zahed was born in Algeria, and then he lived in Tunisia, Switzerland, London, and New York. He studied in France, in Paris, and in Aix-en-Provence. In his adolescence, he was trained to eventually become an imam through the study of Quranic exegesis. Since then, he went on to obtain a master's in cognitive psychology from the École Normale Supérieure. Today, he is a doctoral student in anthropology of religion at the École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales. He was the founder and former spokesperson of the Association des Homosexuels Musulmans de France, HM2F. He also founded the first association of young HIV-positive people in France. Additionally, he was the founder and former spokesperson of Musulmans Progressistes de France, MPF. He is currently the founder and international coordinator of CALEM, which is basically a confederation of Euro-African or Muslim LGBT associations rather. Ludovic is also the author of numerous articles on the subject of Islam and of homosexuality. He has written numerous books, published in a few languages, including a book on homosexuality and Islam entitled Le Coran et la Chair, which was translated into English under the title of Queer Muslim Marriage. In 2011, he wrote a book on children infected by AIDS entitled Révolte extraordinaire, un enfant du sida autour du monde. Ludovic is a fervent defender of rights of LGBT sexual minorities. He especially thinks that Muslims at the dawn of the 21st century, can no longer ignore the homophobic and dehumanizing violence of certain religious extremists. He advocates for an Islam that is neither homophobic nor misogynistic. He has said that if the Prophet Muhammad were still alive today, he would be marrying homosexual couples. Above all, Ludovic is convinced that it is possible to construct an inclusive representation of Islam, a representation that is truly peaceful and liberating for the good of humanity. Our second speaker tonight is Zonneveld, who was born in Malaysia and spent a good portion of her formative years raised in Germany, Egypt, and India. Her exposure to different politics, religions, and cultures has shaped her worldview. She is today the founder and president of Muslims for Progressive Values, an international grassroots organization where inclusive and egalitarian expression of Islam is advocated and implemented. Since its inception in 2007, it has grown to include chapters in Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., Atlanta, Chicago, New York, Columbus, Ohio, Ottawa, Toronto, Canada, Chile, France, Australia, Malaysia, as well as South Africa. Muslims for Progressive Values has recently secured its consultative status as a UN-recognized NGO. Annie is also the co-chief editor of Progressive Muslim Identities, Personal Stories from the US and Canada. And she is also a contributor to the anthology American Dreamers. She contributes regularly to aslanmedia.com and the Huffington Post. In 2006, she was named a Muslim Leader of Tomorrow by the American Society for Muslim Advancement. Above all, Annie is an unconventional bridge builder who spreads the message of social justice and peace from the viewpoint of a progressive Muslim woman. Thank you once again for coming, and I'm going to pass now the floor to Ludovic for his presentation.
Thank you to be here. Thank you for the Association Francophone de l'Université de Boston for organizing this 3 days very interesting event. Thank you to Seyful for all his work. He almost died 2 days ago. He flew and everything, but he bravely came to see you to finish the preparation of all the seminars that we are having the chance to share together. So yesterday we had a talk in French, so I'm not going to come back in details about what I said yesterday, but just to give you an overview for those who were not here. So as Zahed said, I was born in Algiers. I was raised as a Muslim, practicing Muslim. I studied for 5 years the Quran and Usul Fiqh, which is like the columns of Islamic jurisprudence in Algeria. And I wanted to become an imam since I was like 12 years old. I wanted to go also to study in Medina, which is like the second holiest city for Muslims in Saudi Arabia, nearby Mecca, the city where our beloved Prophet is buried in his mosque. And I discovered at 17 years old that what I was trying to repress for years was called homosexuality. So from that point, I was having the choice either to reject Islam because it was not a true religion, or to change my sexuality and become straight because homosexuality is a perversion. At that time, I didn't have the culture, maturity, the intelligence perhaps, and the distance also to make my mind. So it was very hard for me to make a decision. It took me 2 years of hard suffering and struggle with my own self and my own heritage, everything I was believing in, to say either you abandon Islam and you stop trying to change your sexuality, or you're going to die because it's like becoming too hard. It's like having headaches just to think about praying and stuff like that. So it was really cognitive dissonance, as we say in psychology. It's like you have two representations of reality, and you're trying to make them fit, and they do not fit because you don't have the tools to deconstruct dogma, Islamic dogma, and make it a spirituality that will make allow you to be in peace with everything around you and inside of you. And you don't have also the tools to deconstruct the prejudices against homosexuality and sexual diversity. So I decided to abandon Islam for practice of Islam for 7 years. I was not that bad, but not good either. I was not happy. That was what I said to my sister, I still remember. And I studied psychology, I studied cognitive neurosciences, and I was about to start a PhD. And then, as I said yesterday, I was discriminated because of my HIV positive status in a university. So I was once again facing discrimination, unfair discrimination. So either you collapse or you choose to go over it. So I went over that, and I understood also, it was a part of me understanding that discrimination could come from anywhere. So I left France, where I studied at that time, for 2 years around the world, doing a world tour for AIDS children with an organization called AIDS Children World Tour. We did a documentary, a book, report about how those children are taken care of in different countries regarding faith, culture, economics, and so on. and I undertook my Islamic practice again. Before I left for France, I did a pilgrimage to Tibet in Lhasa because I was very stressed at work and studying and working. Many people you know that it's very demanding. So I was more and more into meditation, Buddhist meditation. And when I've been to Lhasa to try to reconnect with some kind of spirituality that I was discovering, I understood two things, very important things for me at the time. First of all, that you can find also Buddhists telling you that women are not very good compared to men, and that homosexuals are perverts or not well-balanced human beings and so on. It's not written anywhere in their books either, not like that, black and white, but there's some people, some very conservative, patriarchal individuals have that representation of gender and sexuality. So the second thing I understood there was that you can make a difference and disconnect dogma and spirituality. It's not that smart, perhaps, because it took me 27 years of my life to understand what dogma is and what spirituality should be. So I left France after that discrimination at the university, and when I come back, I undertook my studies again in PhD, but this time not in neurosciences, but in anthropology, studying queer Muslims, Islam, homosexuality, those people, what do they do, how do they live. I'm one of them, but I wanted to have some distance between me, to put some distance between myself and my study, my terrain, to try to find very objective information about how those people are deconstructing their own way, like I did it before, dogma and prejudices against Islam, against Arabs, against homosexuality, transsexuality, and so on. Am I missing something? I think that's pretty it. When I was, during that war tour, when I was in Caucasus, I met people that has been, who have been colonized by very totalitarian communist regimes, and they forgot their Islam. I was praying in a train, I still remember very well, and that woman dressed all in white, like middle-aged woman from Kazakhstan, and she said to her grandson, because he was like, I speak a bit of Russian, so he was like, what is he doing? And she was like, he's praying. And she was like, Allah Muhammad, which means Allah, the God in Arabic, and Muhammad, the name of our beloved Prophet. And I understood that she was not even able to make the Shahada, which is the first pillar of Islam. Like this, I testify that there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his Prophet. So I said, wow, those guys are completely like brainwashed. They're not even able, 80 years old, to do a basic practice of Islam. I'm so lucky because I undertook again, like 5 pillars of Islam, whatever, the normative practice of Islam, if you want to say. And I was very happy, very at peace with that, because I knew at that time who I was. I was doing something good for children that almost nobody cares about, like AIDS children dying in hospitals or in the street, because even in state hospitals in Kazakhstan and other in Venezuela or other countries, they don't want to welcome them. So I understood at that time, for the very first time of my life, that I could be someone, a good human being. And I also understood that there's so many different Islam. Of course we know that, but you see it with your eyes and you hear people like completely brainwashed or dogmatic about something in another country like Iran, where I was, like Pakistan, like India also, and so on, it's different. It makes another sense. And Cape Town also. In South Africa, where I was, where there's also a nice community of Muslims there for centuries. So when I come back to France, I believe that I am strong enough to take part of a public debate about Islam and homosexuality, because like the main topics during the last presidential elections, 2 years ago, main topics were Islam. Is Islam compatible with the values, laicity, with the like values of the Republic? And do we have to give homosexuals the same rights than any other individual within our Republican law? So in 2010, it was before the last presidential election, but the debate around those two topics was already very, very vivid. I founded what we called HM2F, the Homosexual Muslims de France, because in French, for those who speak French, we have some people here. So this is de France, of France. And I still remember that I was not able to find a name, like some other queer Muslim organizations are called Iman, Al-Fatiha in the USA, Iman in the UK, and so on. Very poetic, metaphoric representation of their heritage. But I didn't want that. I wanted something very descriptive, because I didn't know who were those people that I was trying to welcome, to invite in that network that it's still active, even though I'm not involved in that. So I called it just simply HM2F, descriptive, normative, epistemology. We can talk about that, of course, but at least it was for mainstream Muslims and LGBT people in France, something that could be understood pretty easily. And we did a presentation called Laïcité. This is a translation, but Laïcité, double chance, contre et double discrimination. Because laïcité was something that was used within the gay and lesbian network in France, networks. And some organizations told us, you are Muslims, we could not work with you because Muslims have a double discourse, like Ramadan and so on. And from their point of view, we all hypocrites, so they could not work with us. Some of them, not all of them, but they told us that. So, once again, I was not the one who wanted to add that blessing on our Prophet because I didn't know who wanted to come to our citizen network. So I said, let's be very secular, let's be a bit distant to our Islamic beliefs for those who are Muslims, because some queer Muslims, a lot of them unfortunately, reject Islam because they think, like I thought 25 years ago, that it's not possible to be both. Like it's an oxymoron, it's like two incompatible representations of our identities. So one of our board member, told me we should have a prayer to open our presentation. So that's what we have after a few months of existence. Just to give you an overview, we created that citizen network at a time where both in the LGBT, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transsexual community and in the Arab Muslim community or Muslim communities, because race is an issue within Muslim communities in France, they don't mix, unfortunately. It was, for those people from the mainstream in both communities, it was impossible to be both at the same time. So our aim was not to create a ghetto, but to work towards a more inclusive representation of Islam within a safe space to welcome those people who are concerned by these problematics. So this is not updated, but last time I checked, it was almost 500 people subscribing to the newsletter, men, women, transgender, from different faiths, because there's also Jews, Christians, or atheists who wanted to be part of that dynamic and joined us from the very beginning. And the average is youth, more or less. It's 25, 30, 35 years old, because the older generation, like 55 and up, are still having some problems defining themselves as gay and lesbians for good, bad reasons, whatever. We can talk about that, but that's the reality still up to date in France. So we built the organization on two axes. The first one is fighting back dogmatic representations of Islam, and especially those considering that they have to forbid to gay and lesbians to practice Islam. This is a basic human right that is recognized by Islam from my point of view. And the other axis was to fight back racism and what we call Islamophobia within the LGBT community, but also in France, generally speaking, because it was a big media buzz after we created the organization and the inclusive mosque in Paris in collaboration with progressive Muslims for progressive values, that we have a branch now active in France called MPF, Musulmans Progressistes de France. So all of that made us like one of the agents of change in France for several months and several years, especially around the presidential election. So there's different groups and commissions of reflection and action in the organization. We established 3 rules very clearly. The fact that everybody has to speak in his or her name. I speak in my name, not in the name of a religious authority, not in the name of a political party or another organization. We listen to each other's testimony. So there's some people telling you Islam is a fanatic religion by nature. So we will tell them perhaps, oh, this is a bit extreme, but what do you mean by that? I'm trying to understand those people, where they're coming from. And some other people telling us, no, but we should not be homosexuals. We have to change it to become straight. And you will tell them, yeah, that's also a bit extreme, because like if someone wants to be both, or neither one or the other, it's also his or her choice, not up to you to tell him or her what he or she do. And our testimonies are confidential, of course. That was the rules that we established. As I told you, one organization, namely the political representative of the LGBT community in France, in Paris especially, called l'Inter-LGBT, refused to work with us because they said in public session, you are Muslims and so on. So very racist and Islamophobic. But otherwise, we worked very hard to be inclusive and included in many other organizations in France and Europe, like the LGBT Fédération LGBT, which is like lesbian and gay confederation in France, but less recognized as a political representative of the LGBT community, which is weird. The ILGA Europe, International Lesbian and Gay Association, RAVAG, for victims of discriminations, Hypergay for HIV/AIDS research, CALEM, that we founded with other organizations, which is like the confederations of associations, LGBT Euro-Africans, Muslim. So it's not really English, I know, but in French it goes well, so we didn't change the logo. And the MTE, which is Maman toutes égales, which means mothers all equal. Because we had that problem in France for years now, where the veil is forbidden in schools, as you know, but more and more schools are changing their inner rules to forbid mothers to get in the school to fetch their children. Just getting in the school is forbidden to them now. To go in the city hall also, it's becoming very hard for people. I mean, women wearing a simple scarf, not like dark, burqa and so on, even though it's their rights, but not that extreme, just something like very traditional, recognized as a common practice for many women in Islam, is starting to become very hard in France for mothers especially. So we work hard also on that network. So as I said, we put forward the fact that like racism, Islamophobia, misogynia, homophobia, transphobia, all of that lies on the same kind of process. It's what we call in social psychology infrahumanization. So it's not dehumanization, it's technical, whatever. It's infrahumanization, which means I'm not going to tell you that you're not human, dehumanization. It's infrahumanization. So I'm going to use you in my society. I'm going to put you in a ghetto. I'm going to put you in a social category where I can control your identity. You're still human, but you're not as human as I am, as my group is. So to go a bit quickly about that, just to give you an idea of the tools that we're using in our numerous publications that you can find on the website of HMDZF and MPF, and also of Kalem, like videos, booklets, books also. I can send you all of that if you send me an email, no problem, including the books that I'm reading personally. Infrahumanization is a social phenomenon. It's an unconscious belief. It has nothing to do with choice, like what we used to think about when we say choice. It's something unconscious, and it has nothing to do with your culture, with your faith, with Islam, with the Arab culture. And this is something that tortured me for years, because I was like, is it Islam that is homophobic, or is it a certain representation of Islam? Is it the Arab culture? Perhaps it's my religion. I got back to Islam. I'm happy with that. But perhaps it's because they are Arabs. So you see, it's internalized also homophobia and Islamophobia and racism. So we have also, as queer Muslims, to deconstruct those infrahumanizing representations. I'm not giving lessons that, oh, you guys, you are homophobic. I'm telling also, I'm starting by myself. And that's what I did at that time in the organization, telling everyone, and I believe it worked. Like, we have to work first on ourselves before going outside and trying to have a peaceful message to our brothers and human brothers and sisters. It's an animal instinct. People believe when they are under that unconscious process that people of the out group, as we say in sociology, have no emotion, no faith, no belief. They could not believe in God, because they're animals. They sleep together, they do stuff like that, and it's very weird, we don't understand. Or something not about sexuality, like those guys, they dress funny, and they could not wear a jean like all of us, and why do they have that scarf on their head, or the turban for sick people also? So there's always that unconscious process of being afraid of the difference. So picking up the detail and telling to yourself, to in a group, they are different, so we could discriminate them without feeling guilty. This is very important. And that could be a mortal illusion, because it could go up to genocide. Like during the Second World War, like Jews and other ethnic minorities in Europe have been deported, but also homosexuals. That we don't know that much. That homosexuals have been deported from Germany especially, but also all over Europe, in France also, and they have been lobotomized. Yeah, lobotomized, which is like, wow, why Nazis would do that. It has nothing to do with religion. It has to do with totalitarianism and fascism. Totalitarianism, by definition, it's I am the power, unique power. Especially in periods of crisis, like during the Second World War, before, people, social psychology again, wants to have a chief, a very powerful chief, to be able to push him, generally it's him, not her, forward and say, okay, lead us, kill all our enemies, we're going to follow you, and reinforce the in and group boundaries and exclude the out groups and look for scapegoats inside our own group. This is basic social dynamic. It has nothing to do with culture or with this or that culture or with this or that belief or religion. So, is Islam homophobic? By nature. And that would be my last point before I give you some biscuits about my research and who are those people, For us, we came to the conclusion, and in USA I was talking, thanks to Zahed, with Casey Ali, who is a great intellectual, one of the first one in the world. She took a position, she converted to Islam years ago, and she was one of the first one, perhaps the first one for some people, the first one to say that we have to reform our understanding of Islam to include same-sex marriage, same-sex unions, and blessings and celebrations and so on. For Muslims, Islam is peace. That's what it means. Salama, the radical in Arabic, means peace. Assalamu alaikum means peace be upon you. It also means like submission to peace, to happiness, to authority. There's many interpretations. Like Amina Wadud, who is an Afro-American woman imam from California, she says also that Islam means terrorism. Very provocative affirmation. But she listed something like 17 meanings of Islam, not exhaustive, not extensive. But she says, you see, Islam could mean many things, but certainly not a blind submission to a majority totalitarian authority. Our Prophet ﷺ accepted mukhannathun in his home. Mukhannathun, khuntha in Arabic, it's being androgynous. So those guys, according to the sources of hadith, which is the Islamic tradition, very dogmatic, very classical Islamic tradition, those guys were effeminate, they had no desire for women, they were wearing colorful clothes, and they were doing poetry and helping the wives of the Prophet ﷺ, and this is Aisha radiallahu anha, the wife of the favorite wife of the Prophet after Khadija death, who says that they used to help them in the home of the Prophet with the children and wives and so on. So they were not considered as perverts, people that we have to kill to put aside. I'm not talking about is it halal, is it haram, is it licit, is it illicit, is it good or not in Islam to be homosexual. I'm not talking about that. This is not my point, and I hope will never be my point, because I go over beyond that. We don't need to tell people what they have to do, from my point of view. Islam is an example. But the Quran says, نَحْنُ نَقُصُّ عَلَيْكَ أَحْسَنَ الْقَصَصِ, which means we are telling you the best of stories ever. My grandmother was telling me 1001 Night when I was a kid in Nigeria, and I loved it, and I never thought or believed that it was a law that I had to follow, step by step. So there's a big difference. People of Lot, which is Sodom and Gomorrah's people, in the Bible, Torah, the Quran also it's quoted. There's many verses. I can give you all the references also if you want, but there's one very important for me. مَا سَبَقَكُمْ بِهَا أَحَدٌ مِنَ الْعَالَمِينَ. This is God, Azza wa Jal, talking to them and telling them, nobody before you has done that abomination, crime, whatever the translation they want to give up. What does it mean? That they invented homosexuality 5,000 years ago? Some people say believe so. I don't believe that they invited me. I believe that the crime is described in the Quran. If you go back to each and every verse, it's violence, it's rape, it's being thief, it's not accepting guests from outside of your city, and so on. You can talk about that. I'm not telling you it's the truth. I'm respecting all representation of Islam. If there's no violence there, I have absolutely believe me, no problem. Okay, so I want to tell you more about Callan. So some of the accomplishments of Callan, that confederation that we are part of, we're a Muslim confederation. We organize conferences. One of the first one was at the French National Assembly. Now we have branches and activities in France, Europe, North Africa, South Africa. We're doing more and more seminars and trainings, 1 hour to up to 3 days for organizations that need that knowledge in Africa, in countries like Uganda, even Kenya, which is a very liberal country economically, but they are starting to think about criminalizing homosexuality, transsexuality. Where is it coming from? Why now? This is also something very important we can talk about. We have that interfaith global network, global interfaith network that we created in 2012, December in Stockholm, with other faith-based LGBT networks. For example, we co-organize also a Lesbian Muslims conference. The first one was in 2010 in South Africa. Refugees and asylum seekers assistance with inclusive mosque and training center, asylum center that we are about to open in nearby Cape Town. Cultural and spiritual journeys with documentaries. We've been to Holy Land to visit the Quds, which is like Jerusalem, which is a very holy place for Muslims. We've done a documentary about that. We've been to Mecca and Medina to do a pilgrimage with Amina Madoud, that inclusive, straight imam from California. We've been to Morocco also to visit the holy shrines of Sufi masters there, and so on. I want to show you an extract of you have to go here for the documentary system. An extract of that very beautiful documentary that you can find online on YouTube. If you Google YouTube like Tawheed Umrah Amina Madoud Zahed, you find that documentary very quickly. I hope you will understand because the sound is very low. Sorry.
One evening we tried to perform the prayer of sunset on the central courtyard facing the Kaaba. Men and women of our group all mixed up. Unfortunately, we were chased and some have even been pushed aggressively by the conservatives who have no respect for human dignity. Indeed, the religious police, Al-Mutawwa, deploys incredible energy to impose its sectarian and patriarchal dogmatism at the heart of the Islamic holy places. They seem to think that some form of violence would be allowed to maintain a strict gender and sex segregation, that there are still a few years. Those who have already been on pilgrimage could testify, had never been applied in Mecca. However, there is some corners of the mosque where families and inclusive groups such as ours can pray in peace.
Everybody's coming together, so actually I stood next to a woman who was next to her husband. It was just a woman and a husband because we came early. And they just stayed together. They stayed together the whole time. And then people came, and then two Iranian women sat next to me.
Amina Malou, the Afro-American woman that Imam that I'm telling you about, and she's telling about her first pilgrimage to Mecca when she was with another inclusive group, and the fact that she struggled to be able to pray sometimes, because there's a lot of people, especially the Hajj, which is a big pilgrimage. There was a small pilgrimage from Umrah. So she said that she had found a place next by a couple, and a woman coming from Iran, and then other people came on the right, on the left, and then people with disabled women with wheelchairs and so on. So because of that, she was able to pray next to the Kaaba. Otherwise, the Mutawwa that did it with us just before this sequence, they told us, no, go back and with your woman. And they were taking my mother, because women who were praying side by side with her were my mother, and they were really taking her on, and while I was praying, I was not even able to defend her. So that's what she's talking about.
So it really it depends on whether or not men will give up their privilege to walk.
This is a main reason for this. Still women are forbidden to pray them. And it's new, it's been a few years.
Yeah. So that's why, like Sadia Sheikh, when she did the Imama in Barcelona, she said, I don't even want to stand Imama. I will stand amongst you, like Aisha used to do. So even when she led with men and women, she didn't stand in front. She made the line one line. So it was real interesting to different ways to begin to practice inclusiveness.
Sadia Sheikh that she's talking about is a South African Muslim feminist at the University of Cape Town, the best university in Africa. And Barcelona for years was the place where the International Congress for Islamic Feminism used to take place for 4 or 5 times.
People are not used to it. And so you really do have to be patient. If they are not ready for it, it does not help to force it. But why should they be forced not to practice if they are ready?
See, this is considered as a prayer for Muslims. And men and women are mixed together. Even before Islam. The first time I've been to Mecca was in 2003, I think, just after my visit to Tibet. And it was not a problem. We were able to pray next to women, 1 or 2 meters between you and her, of course, but the Islamic culture, it's not a problem. But not that violence about you go out, and we close the big square just before 10 minutes before Salat, before the prayer, to literally evacuate all the women. This is crazy. It's a lot of work for them. Why? Why now?
So inclusive is not just making everybody stand in line together, but sometimes people are not ready, but giving everyone the choice. So if a man is not comfortable standing next to a woman, if a woman is not comfortable standing next to a man, you actually form the lines so that a man who is comfortable with a woman who is comfortable, whether maybe they are relatives or maybe they're just comfortable. But then a woman can be next to her, a man can be next to him. So he's not ready, he doesn't have to stand next to her, he's not ready. But by practicing it, because it is not what we are accustomed to, but by practicing it, people become accustomed. The whole idea that, he's looking under her dress when she's actually, because he's not used to her just praying. Guess what? We're all praying. And then after a while, say, oh, just another person praying. It doesn't matter if a man or a woman. But we make it so difficult.
And you see here, just before Salat, there's only men, because the police, the religious police, decided to take away all the women from the main square. Yes.
So I've actually been to Mecca for Umrah, and I remember there's actually a section it's divided off between men and women. My mom, it was my mother, myself, my father, and my 2 children. Not my 2 brothers, sorry. So they're allowed to pray inside the area of the haram, but it's just a whole different area. And the whole.
Very good. Thank you very much, because we're going to see what they have.
Well, I have one quick thing to say, because I know you mentioned that there's an inclusive way of praying with men and women next to each other, but I think it's a different point of view, because if you have, so say you have someone like me, a 19-year-old, and you're praying inside Mecca next to what, we don't have an infinite number of family members, but we can like put our sister next to us, and then next to our mom and sister, like 2 uncles.
Exactly.
There's going to be someone who's a stranger next to them, and sexual desires come out when the whole focus should be on the ibadah, the worship.
But that's what she's saying. She's saying if we're not ready, if some people have problems, let's put some elder on the right side, the left side. That's what she said. And
but how do you get ready? It's
sense.
like it's a natural emotion that's elicited. It's not something you can prepare for.
Thank you very much for your question, but we're going to have a question.
Just look at the place that the women have in the central square. So you can imagine that the square is very big, because Mecca, you've seen it. And this is like perhaps 5% for women. All the rest is for men. So, and this is new. I can testify of the fact that I've been there 5 times for Hajj and 4 Umrah, in family, alone, with this, with that. And I've never seen that before the last time I've been. And I have to say that it was very violent for me to see my mother trying to fight with a policeman that she didn't know, trying to just finish her prayer. Anyway, you can find the documentary, and once again, I respect totally the representations of every Muslim. It's just a question of why now? What's happening now to the Arab Muslim world for homosexuals and women to be scapegoats? Like, the problem is coming from there for many Arab Muslims. I want to finish, because I have, let's say, 5 more minutes. Just to give you an overview of the people that the participants to my study for 5 years now. I've taken their interviews, something like between 2 and 3 hours of interview, free interview with some questions sometimes, 4 to 5 main topics like relationship to Islam, relationship to coming out, to family, and stuff like that. So we have 20 interviews. The first one I'd like to talk about is Abu Nu'man. It's not his real name, of course. He's French, half from Congo and half from Caribbean background, HIV positive, and he was a Salafi, as he said, for years before he discovered also that he was homosexual. So it's very interesting to see how those individuals are the intersection of different identities that are those identities rejected from the public space. It's like we do not exist. We do not belong to here. Is Islam compatible with the Republic? Could you be Muslim and French? Could you be French from an Arab background? All those questions, plus the fact that you are homosexual, plus the fact that your skin is black, plus the fact that you have been contaminated very young to HIV, by HIV. It's very interesting to see how that very smart, very sweet guy is trying to liberate himself to survive, really, because he was cutting his head and really almost committing suicide. So how did he manage to do it? And you'll have to read my thesis, I guess, to learn more about him. He had a bisexual woman converted to Islam, French, wearing a scarf, wearing hijab, praying and so on, very practicing Muslim. And one day she discovered that she is bisexual, that she loves a woman. So what does she do with that? Because she's very smart and very engaged in anti-racist and anti-Islamophobic organizations. So she tells us about all the vanguard representations that she is elaborating to, once again, free herself, but also as a first secretary, after myself, of Hashem Joseph, to free, to help, you never free someone, help them to elaborate their own representation of freedom, of relationship to Islam, to sexuality, and so on. How did she do that? It was also fascinating work to see how she was taking Amina Wadud as an example, because she also attempted to try to commit suicide, and then she went to Barcelona and she met all those feminists, including Amina Wadud, she is her hero, her reference now. Nair, who is a Kabyle refugee in France, he is confronted, he says, to racism and Islamophobia, and also to homophobia to a certain extent within his own family and own community, even though he's practicing Islam his own way, like praying from time to time and doing Ramadan, which is the month of fast that we're going to have this year in July, inshallah. So he's praying and fasting with Muslims of his own family, straight people, but they never talk about that. Why? And how could he be part of his family without talking about who he is? Ofa, who is a Ismaili Shia from originally from Pakistan, but he was born in France, and he's Ismaili Shia is like Aga Khan is the other Ismaili. There's two branches in Ismaili Shia. I don't know if you're familiar with Sunni and Shia branches of Islam, so that's a question of politics at the early stage of Islamic societies, constituting and so on. Anyway, so he's telling us why it is so important for him to be part of his minority within minority community in France, the Ismaili Muslim Shia in France, and how he could even choose to be discriminated, like go pray at the back as a child because you're gay, but we accept you as a Muslim. So he was telling me that for him, like doing the coming out and fighting for human rights, it's true to a certain extent, but he will never go all the way to what we see most of the time in Europe. Like I go out and I tell everybody that I'm gay or lesbian or trans, and I want the same rights and I want to do pride and so on and so forth. So that was also very interesting to see those colors in every sense of the term, representations illustrated by those individuals. So I'm going to finish here, just to tell you that for me, once again, what's important is what is Islam, what is Islamic. Islam doesn't exist. There's only Muslims. Islam doesn't have a phone number or an address that you can write to and get an answer. Unfortunately, perhaps it will be easier, perhaps not. So we are free to choose our own representation of our faith, culture, heritage, and so on. And for me, being progressive, inclusive, all those labels, of course, but being that kind of Muslims identified as progressive and inclusive, I wanted to really study who are those Muslims and what's happening now with Islam. Why 200 years ago, when Europeans used to come to Turkey, they were calling homosexuality the Turkish vice, Turkish perversion, Arab perversion, because everybody was into homoeroticism and so on. It was not a problem. And now it's the other way around, with people in the Arab Muslim world, like Joseph Assad, for those who know him, and other people having some difficulty to use those performative categories like gay, lesbian. This is colonialism for them. So what's happening around those issues, and why is it so important? Why is it so important? Is it related to the root of our faith, but also to the root of the problematic concerning Islam, homosexuality, and the Arab culture nowadays? Thank you.
All right, can you hear me? Hi, everyone. So shall I go ahead? Yep. Yes? Okay. All right. So my name is Zonneveld, and I am the founder and president of Muslims for Progressive Values. I founded the Progressive Muslim community in Los Angeles in 2006 because I wanted a progressive community that I could relate to in the form of artistic expression, freedom of expression that was egalitarian in its interpretation. Soon after 9/11, I decided to restudy Islam. And in the course of relearning Islam, I discovered that it was much more liberating in its theology than the actual practice that I was raised on even. And I come from a rather pragmatic Muslim Sunni family. So I was part of a traditional mosque, but after discovering how liberating the Quran was and its teaching, I thought, well, there was no way I was able to feel comfortable in the traditional mosque that I was part of. I felt that it was shortchanging the true values of Islam, so I decided to create my own community. And fortunately, as a result of social media, meetup.com, I discovered there were a lot of other Muslims in the Los Angeles area that also felt the same way. And what we discovered were there were also other pockets of progressive Muslim communities that were popping up in the United States, and we came together in 2007 and created Muslims for Progressive Values, and that's when we registered and became a 501c3. Now we have chapters in Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., Atlanta, New York, Columbus, Ohio, Chicago, and also in Canada, France, South Africa, Chile, Malaysia, and hopefully Pakistan and a Middle Eastern country. That's what we're really targeting. And we've also become a UN recognized NGO as of December last year. Our 4 points that we are very that we focus on are issues on gender equality, and in our particular case, in the United States, for the most part, not absolute, but for the most part, women's rights in Islam are pretty equal to that of men. But what is very different is that the issue of Muslim women's spiritual equality, and this is we find following in the footsteps of Amina Wadud and many scholars now that have written scholarly writings in support of women imamas and women leading prayer. So that is one of the points that we advocate for. We believe that Muslim women's spiritual equality is important in establishing the psychological barrier where women are looked upon as being inferior to that of men. We feel that it is this spiritual inequality that puts women in spaces where, for example, in the United States, where women have to enter through the back door, they have to cover up, they don't have the freedom of thought, freedom of speech. A lot of their human rights, basic human rights, are curtailed, even in the United States, in the traditional mosques. We also advocate for LGBTQ rights, and we have created inclusive spaces since the beginning, since 2006, where everyone is treated as equals, no ifs and buts. And if you are from the United States, you recognize the term "don't ask, don't tell." Well, that's definitely not a policy that we practice in our mosque. It is absolutely advocating, affirming LGBTQI identities. We encourage them to lead prayer, we encourage them to give a sermon as much as we encourage the woman. What is very important that we are not here to replace patriarchy with matriarchy, because that can also be just as bad. So we've seen those examples. The issue of freedom of expression and freedom from religion, freedom of religion is also a strong position that we take. There are, if I'm not mistaken, no other Muslim organization that really advocates for the freedom of religion from the Islamic context. And that is a position that makes us also very unique, besides the LGBTQ rights and women imams. We really feel that going back to the tradition of Prophet Muhammad, where people converted in and out of Islam, where even the Quran is very explicit that there's no compulsion in faith. We feel that the way Islam is being interpreted, and in the context of supposedly Sharia law, that is a misrepresentation, a misinterpretation, a distortion of what the true values of Islam is really about. So those are some of the issues that we advocate for. We produce our content, educational materials that, in partnership with American Muslim scholars, because we feel that a lot of Muslims are miseducated about the true teachings of Islam. In the world context, what we've become very visible because of these four positions, and we are making our presence even more so in the United Nations, given our new status. So we'll be advocating for these positions with panel discussions in Geneva in June, in New York in August, and taking some of our panel discussions on the road. I think it is. I think the United States is going to be. Well, we've seen that what we do here in the United States have affected change overseas, and the Voices of Muslims for Progressive Values, how that has instigated change even in the United States. So I'll give you one example how. For however many years, we've been advocating for the same positions, and we are quoted in the media a lot. And as a result of that, the traditional communities in the United States have had to have these discussions within their mosques. And they've been pointing to NPV and stating, hey, how come they allow women to lead prayer? Hey, how come they advocate for LGBTQ rights within the context of Islam? And what about freedom of expression? And so as a result of our advocacy, these conservative Muslim organizations have had to address these issues within their community. And so that's the sort of change we're starting to see in the United States. And that started to happen in the last year and a half. And obviously we've started doing this 7 to 8 years. So we do see that positive change. And because of social media, we also see a lot of change happening in the international scene, and how people are joining our Facebook groups and participating in conversation and private conversations. And there really is such a hunger for this rational thinking Islam that is so lacking within the larger Muslim population. There is such a yearning for freedom of expression and freedom to read, freedom to express yourself within the context of Islam. Within Islam giving us the permission to do that, and yet the world powers, the Muslim majority countries, are curtailing those rights, and they have been for decades. Recently, Time magazine identified Muslims for Progressive Values as the progressive Muslim movement, and I'm very proud of that. I think it's just a matter of time before here in the United States our expression of Islam will become the norm. I see a lot of Muslim youth leaving Islam or being disenchanted with Islam, and definitely Muslim women. I've been marrying more and more Muslim women marrying outside the faith, and as some of you probably know, you will not get a traditional imam to marry that combination of interfaith. But statistically speaking, we know that a lot of the mosques are very thin, very few youth involved in their activities. And it has a lot to do with the fact that the way Islam is being practiced in many of these traditional mosques are unrelatable to many of the youth who are well-read, who are educated, who can see what from them reading Islam in the Quran is very different from the Islam that is being practiced in the mosque, and they are very disenchanted with that. And for them, for many of the American Muslim youth who are educated, it's not good enough. So, and that's the change. That's what's happening in the climate in the United States at large, but I think we see that also in the Middle East as well, how there is such a yearning for that freedom of expression, and I think a lot of that has to do with the influence of social media and the exposure social media gives. The exposure of social media allows for different thoughts and different ideas, and that's the beauty of it. There probably is a lot of questions, and I would probably prefer to allow more time for Q&A, if that's okay with you, Saiful. And
the question answer right now, and maybe to start us off, I'd like to ask a question to Ludovic-Mohamed. In my presentation of him, I said that he mentioned that if the Prophet Muhammad were still alive, he would be marrying homosexual couples, and a pretty controversial statement. And I was wondering if you would be able to comment on that a little bit.
Yeah, very important question. Thank you, Saiful. So for me, from my point of view, my understanding of Islam is not an ideology that is totalitarian, trying to control the totality of public space, or fascist, like one face of identity, the other ones we eliminate them. Islam adapted to the context, the historical, the cultural context of that time where it appeared. And it was not for Muslims who believe in Islam, it was not a coincidence. So I believe that, like we saw them turning around the Kaaba, nowadays, I mean, 15 centuries ago, they were doing the same thing before Islam. So Islam didn't raise the Kaaba. He just used the old practice, spiritual practice, to make it more halal, which is like more equal, equalitarian, more inspired by the universal and rooted into a universal ethic. So the same way, Islam does not control who could marry who. Zawj in the Quran, it doesn't have any gender. It means spouse. It could be man, it could be woman. It's perhaps a coincidence. I don't believe so. I think that Islam is very open to gay-friendly, feminist interpretation, and any kind of minority could find a liberation through Islam, but also through other faith and spiritualities that survived for centuries because they were inspired by God of Michael. It is said in the Quran, Ya Ahl al-Kitab, ta'alaw ila kalimatin sawa'in baynana wa baynana, which means, oh, you people of the book. Who is people of the book? Everyone who's got a book, a scripture, an ethic, a universal ethic, so Buddhists, Hindus, Christians, Jews, of course, and so on, Zoroastrians, and so on. So the Quran said, come to a word equal between you and us, not something that we can accept or tolerate without killing you. Equal. It means like it's universal in the sense that we believe in Jesus, we believe in Moses, we believe in all the prophets before the Prophet. So that religion does not, for me, control marriages. Marriage for Muslims is a civil contract. It's qabul wa ijab. One person saying, I would like to marry you, in front of witnesses, at least two, and another one says, yeah, I would like to marry you too. And that's it. If you buy an apartment, it's exactly the same procedure in the tradition, of course. It doesn't mean that it's God saying that or not, we don't know, but I believe so. I believe that it has been inspired like that by the Quran, by the tradition, the Sunnah of the Prophet. So concerning that sentence that I put in my word, I thought about it something like 1 week before I said, yeah, okay, send it to the editor. because I said, if you say so, it might want to, I don't know, kill you. But I really believe that the Prophet ﷺ was a revolutionary agent, changing his own society from within his culture, without destroying it, but loving it, cherishing it, and saying, guys, we have to go back to the roots of our culture. So I believe that if he would be here today, like he said, you have to free slaves, and you have to give rights to women instead of buying women like camels. He did that. I mean, in some cities like Taif, which is a city in Saudi Arabia today, when the Prophet ﷺ came to spread the word of justice and equality and so on, they sent children, which is the biggest insult at that time. They sent children to throw stone to the Prophet ﷺ and his companions. So for me, he was a revolutionary man, and today the revolution is equality in terms of gender, ethnicity, human rights.
Thank you. Are there any more questions? Yes.
I'm interested to know what you would respond to the Quranic anecdote recalling of the Prophet Najrud, where the whole entire city was condemned by God because of homosexuality. Do you have a different interpretation of it, or?
Yes, very short, because I talk about it in the presentation. It's Sodom and Gomorrah, people of Lot. You remember when I said, is Islam homophobic by nature or essence? So when you go back to those verses, they never talk about homosexuality. To be totally honest, it makes sense, because homosexuality is a terminology, epistemology, has been invented, by doctors and psychiatrists during the 19th and 20th century, and we invited in the West heterosexuality. After that, 10 years after, we have the historical sources. So my point is that at that time, the mainstream theory is that at that time, individuals were not categorized according to their sexuality. You were not a homosexual or a straight woman or man or so on. You know what I mean? It was the act that was important. You were a patriarch, for example, like in the Greek civilization, Roman civilization, and the Arab Muslim civilization at that time. You, as a patriarch, you had the right to have to make love to your slave wives, even children sometimes in some part of the Arab Muslim city, civilization, cultures. This is not something monolithic. So, and the Abbasid, 100, 200 years after the death of the Prophet were very known for their poetry, ghazal poetry, like writing homoerotic poetry for young boys and so on. So, without saying that this is the standard of Islam, I'm saying that it was not a problem. People were not categorized and pointed out as homosexuals or transsexuals. As I said, mukhannathun, those androgynous people, had some problems sometimes. Some mukhannathun themselves were internalizing homosexuality and trying to find more effeminate men amongst them and telling them, you are too effeminate. They take them to the Prophet, kill him because he's too effeminate, he's ashamed, I'm ashamed of him, and so on. So it was the same kind of social dynamic. If you go back now to the Quran itself, there's a verse that I quoted earlier saying about Sodom and Gomorrah, مَا سَبَقَكُمْ بِهَا أَحَدٌ مِنَ الْعَالَمِينَ. Nobody else before you did that sin, that abomination, and so on. So what does it mean? Either Allah is not aware that homosexuality exists elsewhere than in Sodom and Gomorrah at that time. I don't think so. Or, second option, homosexuality has been invented by Sodom and Gomorrah 5,000 years ago. I think that Allah is aware that homosexuality exists all over the planet. It has been studied in more than 400 animal spaces. Third option, it means that it was not homosexuality that was pointed out at that time, what we call today homosexuality, same-sex intercourse or whatever. It was something else. When you go back again to the scripture, it's very clear. It was rape. It was violence, it was that kind of thing. It was patriarchy, inequality, it was injustice. If you add to that a description made by Herodotus, who were one of the first historians of our human history, I mean the history that we know, of course. He described the practices of Sodom and Gomorrah, the cities of the plateau of Mesopotamia at that time, as being very barbarian from his Greek point of view. They were, I mean, you have to imagine that at that time, when you're a young man or young woman, if you want to get married, you have first to go to the temple of the goddess Ishtar, goddess of love, goddess of war. So you see, pretty sadomasochist representation of sexuality. You go to the goddess, to the temple of Ishtar in Sodom and Gomorrah. You have to pay the priests, give them money, a donation to the goddess, to be raped. So you offer your virginity to the goddess, and then you can get married. And that was the way to be a good, good son or a good daughter, you know, at that time. So it was all the other way around than today. So once again, it has nothing to do, from my point of view, with homosexuality as we categorize it today. Is it good or not to categorize people according to their sexuality? We all do it. So this is another problematic, but at least it has nothing to do with homosexuality as we define it today.
Are there any more questions? Yes, please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Jenna. My family is Algerian, and I grew up in New York. I was born in New York, but we go back to Algeria like every summer, and I find that every summer I am defending gay rights, I feel like, and I find that often I'm asked, you know, are you gay? Or like they tell me that I'm crazy for having friends that are gay, and like they list these imaginary statistics and this research that just really is not true. And so I find that like those are many reasons that I feel like people are afraid to defend gay rights. And I mean, this obviously, I'm not speaking for all of North Africa or Middle East or anything, but that they're like afraid to defend gay rights and these ideas. So I was wondering if you guys had any ideas as to how that could be ameliorated, how that could be fixed.
I'm going to take it also, perhaps. I'm also coming from Algiers. I was born there, and I used to go there every summer, even 1 week, because my parents used to work a lot. We spent all our holidays there when I was a kid, but now I could not go there anymore because you risk 2 years of jail if you find out to have intercourse with a same-sex individual, and up to 10 years if you also do homosexual propaganda. So like, because it's a danger, the law says, there's 3 articles in the Algerian law, family code, that point out the fact that it's a danger, a threat to family, children, education, and so on, perversion, whatever. So, yeah, I could not go there anymore. Some of my uncles are threatening me, telling me that if they see me, something, they're going to kill me, and so on. I mean, it's like that. They're never going to do it because I know that, but it hurts because it's so much ignorance. They use also Islam, once again, that is a beautiful faith and tradition that was so tolerant, seen as tolerant, even though tolerance is not enough. But at that time, it was already a lot. For centuries, it was seen like that. And now the Arab Muslim culture started to be seen for 150 years, more or less, as very homophobic. Where does it come from? We have some answers, some research paradigm to deconstruct also that prejudice is because of Islam, because of the Arabs, because of this. It's because mainly of colonialism, because it is brainwashing people. They don't know who they are, where they're coming from, so they start believing whatever you tell them. For example, that homosexuality is something forbidden in Islam, per se, and also because those societies are feeling threatened. I mean, when you see what's happening now in Iraq and Syria and other Middle Eastern countries, you can perhaps have some very precise idea of what kind of threats they are afraid of. So they're not totally wrong about colonialism not being good for Arab Muslim societies. But unfortunately, the side effect of colonialism is is looking for infra-humanization of minorities, looking for scapegoats within religious, ethnic, sexual, gender minorities. I don't want to, like some people, point out colonialism and the West and say this is so bad, because Arabs also used to colonize and have slaves and so on. But definitely there is something new here that is related directly to colonialism. And you can see, as I was telling you, that up to the 19th century, when the Ottoman Empire was described as the word empire, l'Empire monde, it was from one side of the known word to the other one. So it was very impressive for Europeans. So when they used to go there, we have, writings of that. When they used to go there, they used to say this is the Turkish homoeroticism and homosexuality. It's the Turkish vice and perversion. And at that time, the Victorian ethic pushes people to be killed, sodomites, up to the 1750 in Paris on the City Hall Square, in front of the City Hall Square. They were burned alive. And 1830 something in Great Britain. So it's very, very fresh in terms of historiography. Another point is that after the 19th century, that importation of the Western knowledge, because the West was more and more advanced in terms of science and also categorization of individuals according to their gender and sexuality. We started in Turkey and in Isfahan, I think, in Iran, and in North Africa also to open modern schools and modern hospitals, and where al-mustashfa is something coming from the Arab culture. We started to import like doctors and scientists from the West. So we also imported their representation of sexuality. So by the time they freed themselves in Europe and North America from their homophobia, we're still having some problem considering people as homosexuals per se, just because they have same-sex relationships or bisexual or transsexuals. So this is ignorance, this is colonialism, this is also, there is studies about that, anthropological, demographical studies, Emmanuel Todd and other scientists, about the fact that it's also a question of economics. If you do not have the financial means to free yourself, if you do not have the means to study and to empower yourself, and you're never going to be able to, you spend your time, and we know, I lived in Algeria during the Civil War, we know what was, the Algerian society during these years, it was very hard. So how could you imagine that they had the time to deconstruct homophobia? They had to survive. So all of that is linked. Once again, I'm convinced it has nothing to do with Islam or the Arab culture per se. It has to do with colonialism, with economical empowerment, and so on. Another last example, 1930 is the first edition of 1001 Nights, printed in Cairo, with all the stories related to women's sexuality and homosexuality censored from that edition, 1930. And you have the Muslim Brotherhood, and you have the Salafi, and you have the Pan-Arabism at the same time raising, So this is not a coincidence. And you have also the independence movements in Algeria, Tunisia, Egypt, and so on. So all of that is, I know it's related.
We have time for about 3 or 4 more questions. So we have 1, 2, and 3.
My question is for Andy. You've been talking about the NGO Muslim progressive value that is now established in many countries. You cited Middle East, and I wanted to know what kind of reaction you faced so far. Are there positive reaction, negative reaction, or neutral regarding your organization there, whose country and which country?
Sorry, who was the question directed to? And I couldn't hear your question.
Okay,
sorry.
My name is Mohammed. My question is for you.
Me, yeah.
And my question is about Muslim for progressive values.
Yes.
So you said it's established in many countries, and you talked about Middle East. I wanted to know what kind of reaction you had from Middle Eastern countries. Are they are they enthusiastic for this organization? Not? Are they neutral? And which example?
Right. So I know there is enthusiasm for Muslims for Progressive Values. We haven't established a chapter in the Middle East yet, but we are looking for partners to establish locally. It is also, the Middle East is going through a lot of changes, obviously, but I was interviewed by a very popular Egyptian television just over a year ago, and the whole hour was about women imams. And my panelist, who I didn't know going into the interview, was a clergy from Muslim Brotherhood. And after this 1 hour program, which was rather intense, I received emails and phone calls from the Middle East, from men from Egypt and Jordan. And their comments to me were, what we are doing here, and directing to me was that what I was leading is the right Islam, and don't listen to these idiots. And because we've had our Arab Spring, our Arab Revolution, the next is going to be the Islamic Revolution, and these are young men that are that can see, that are rational thinkers. They are not secular, the extreme atheist secularists, and they are also not your ultra-Orthodox religious either, but they want an Islam that is rational and yet something that they can hinge their religious beliefs on too. So I really think there is a space for MPV, but it has to be done in a way that is indigenous from the Middle East. So it wouldn't be good for MPV to come in and say, hey, we're going to set up MPV Egypt, for example. It has to be an organization that they set up there that correlates with our values, and that we can partner as a brother-sister or sister organization. But I wouldn't go in and claim that this is MPV Cairo. I don't think that would be a smart move, because there's a lot of baggage of colonial heritage in those areas, and I think it's better for the Middle East to create their own identity. And it's not just the Middle East, Afghanistan, Pakistan. I mean, we get messages from these countries constantly, and how can we set up an MPV in our own communities? So I do think it's dangerous too. It's dangerous work in some of these places, and I can't believe their braveries. It's really commendable. So if you know anyone in the Middle East that wants to create, let us know. Yes.
Yeah, we had one question from you.
Yeah, Assalamu alaikum, my name is Tana.
Oh, hi.
So a couple of things. One is I thank you so much, Ludovic, for your response to Jenna's question. And I think there's a piece that Ani can also answer about how do you, as an ally, have conversation with people who are not in a place, to be thinking about deconstructing homophobia and all of that stuff for whatever reasons. How do you have that conversation? So, and then the other piece is, if there's anyone around in this room who identifies as being part of the LGBTQ community and Muslim, there's a little group here in Boston. If you want to know more, please come and talk to me afterwards.
Excellent. So yes, as an ally, I get that question. So why are you sticking up so much for LGBT rights? What's it to you? And I said, it's human rights. It's just your basic value system. You cannot defend your Muslim right in America and still be prejudiced and homophobic at the same time. That's the stance of a hypocrite. So For me, as a straight ally, and when having this conversation with traditional Muslims who just cannot get past it, the story of Lot, for example, it's very simple. I just say to them, look, did Prophet Muhammad prosecute any homosexuals during his reign of Islam? And the answer is no. Is there any punishment in the Quran towards homosexuality? And the answer is no. And so it's as simple as that. And if you can say to them, it's not about you supporting this homosexual act, it's just treating homosexuals as human beings. It's just as simple as that. Can we not discriminate against them as human beings? After all, they are God created, aren't they? And they cannot really argue with that. And I think if you appeal to the most fundamental value of that, we are all God created, and even Prophet Muhammad himself didn't punish homosexuals. It is blasphemous for them to be punishing, to be discriminating against homosexuals themselves. And I've seen that shift towards the center. And if my work would be somewhat accomplished if I can convince the Muslim world to shift from discriminating to just leave the homosexuals alone, let them live as equals without punishing them. I think if we can shift the Muslim mindset, the Muslim nation states that way, I think we would have been somewhat successful. We're not there yet. We're just starting that. So.
Hi, my name is Terrence. So my question would be, I understand that we're talking about.
Sorry, is it to me or is it to Ludovic? If it's to me, I can't hear you, just so that you know.
Anyone could answer. So my question would be, I think, okay, I'll ask for a little bit, probably. My question would be like, I know we're talking about not discriminating against people who identify themselves as LGBT community, but what is have we considered the theological aspect of homosexuality in the sense that we all, this is the Islam that I understood, is that life is a test, that Islam does not say that you can't be a homosexual, but it's just against the act of homosexuality. So what do you guys like? I'm wondering if it is just about discriminating against homosexuality, or is it about condoning homosexuality?
Let me just reformulate that sentence for Annie, and correct me if I'm misrepresenting what you said, but I believe you were saying that you were trying to bring the discussion more to a theological to its theological roots, and to see well, from your understanding, Islam is not against people being homosexual, but rather homosexual acts, and you were wondering what they had to say about that.
Yeah, because the thing is, like, I am fully supporting if anyone is fighting against discrimination towards any individual, but at the same time, I think I'm wondering what's your stand in the sense of the act of homosexuality.
So I'll give a quick answer. I think Ludovic was talking about marriages between two souls, two spirits, and that is exactly what the Quran states. But it's in the interpretation of the Quran. As you know, a lot of the interpreters' mindset and prejudices has been inserted into the interpretations, and it is interpreted as between man and woman, when in actuality it doesn't say that. And if marriage is between two consenting adults of two souls, and marriage is the relationship that God prefers over illicit sex, then marriage should be permitted, given what I just quoted as far as the synopsis of the Quran, right? I think the relationship between two adults is between two adults, And I think the Quran is really not about necessarily defining marriages between a man and woman. If you look at the Quran and if you step back and you look at it, it's really about protecting the children of heterosexual couples who have children. Even when the Quran gives permission for a man to marry wife number 2, 3, and 4, it is for the purpose of protecting and overseeing the well-being of the children. It is for the man to marry a widower, not for the man to marry, a 14-year-old virgin. So I think the context of relationships is really looked from the well-being of children, the welfare of the children. And so it's not just about man and woman getting married. It is about having a legitimate relationship, love relationship, and the legitimizing is the Islamic aspect of it, which I believe is clearly supported in the Quran. Sorry? Sorry.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that Annie said a lot about that, but to be complementary to that, I'm not going to talk about the marriage. Let's talk about something else that we don't have prejudices against, or that we have, but we have nothing to do, or we have no choice but to deal with it. In Iran, when I was there, it was so bad. I've been to do my prayer at the mosque for Isha, which is the last prayer of the day. But Shia, they don't do Isha. They do it with Maghrib. Like when the sun goes down, you have one prayer, and then 1 hour, 1 hour and a half, it depends which school of what madhab you follow. You do another last prayer of the day, and then you go sleep. Because the other one is very early before the sunrise. Anyway, I've been to the mosque, and the guy was laughing at me. Well, the mosque is closed. There's no Isha. Go back home. We do only 3 prayers here. And this is not a question of marriage, of homosexuality. It's a pillar of Islam. It's salat. It's prayer. And even though we have Muslims having so different representations of that pillar, fasting, the same thing. Some people fast, 40 days. Some others 30 days. The salat itself, the way they pray, Shia, it's different also. If you go to Ismaili, they do different ruku'. The way I prayed with my friend Ismaili, the Ofa that is in my thesis, one of the participants in my study. It is something different that I used to do as a Sunni. There's a nice story that that my Sufi master, which used to be my grandmother, peace be upon her, used to tell me when I was a kid. It was in Nigeria. It was about a woman on an island, isolated island. And you have that boat that is having a problem, so they have to fix it. And those guys, they're Muslims, they end up on that island and they start fixing their boat. And they meet with that woman, and she sees them, praying 5 times a day. So she says, "Oh, this is very beautiful, the way that you pray, and on the earth and the sky, and all the metaphor about Sufi, the fact that your body is writing Allah when you are praying, and the fact that when you go back to Allah, it's like going back to the mattress, like a baby, and Allah also, Rahmah, which is Rahmah, is that called? Mercy means also the Rahim, which is like the uterus of the feminine part of our nature, and so on. They say, okay, we're going to teach you how to pray like Muslims. And they were like one day after the other while fixing the boat. One of them was trying to teach them how to pray. So she learned how to pray like Muslims, and then they were living because the boat was fixed. And they say bye-bye, and they are on the sea, going away from the island. And she's like, okay, I'm going to pray. Oh gosh, Ya Allah, I forgot how to pray. And she runs to them, and she ran on the water, and she, come back, please, come back, teach me again how to pray. And they look at her, they say, oh no, you don't need to know how to pray. Just go back, because You were saying when we came to you, Allah knows Aisha and Aisha knows Allah. Allah knows that, and so on. That was her prayer, and that was enough. So what I mean by that is that spirituality is not the law. The fiqh, in Arabic, faqih, it's someone who knows, who understands. It's the understanding of the Sharia. Sharia is the Sharia is the street, the avenue, is the way, the path, the spiritual path that you progress on. And it makes, for me now, I can say it because I deconstructed that in my own spirit, it makes no difference if you're gay or not, if you're married to a man like me or not. Because Allah, whatever Allah is, because once again, a very interesting Sufi master code is like, Islam is one of the only religion, with perhaps only Buddhism. There's nice books about dialogue between Buddhism and Islam that starts the testimony of Islam with a negation. There is no God. La ilaha illallah. And Allah once again means, refers in Arabic, alaha, to everything that is immanent, so beautiful in our nature. So we don't know what Allah wants of us. We have an idea. Al-halalu bayyin wal-haramu bayyin. So what is licit is clear, and what is not licit is clear. And for me, it is clear that being homosexual and having marital link to someone else that you love and respect, and perhaps having children with that person if you want, is nothing haram about it. But it's very interesting what you said, very respectfully, in my understanding, because we all like that. We have been raised to believe, conditioned to believe that it's haram. There's a problem there. But like Eric Fassin, who is a French sociologist, says, or Elizabeth Stewart and other queer theologians and philosophers says, linking sexuality and natality, like making babies, to God is very weird. And we have to think about that perhaps.
But then I understand there's spirituality, and then there is the rulings in Islam, but there's also the fitrah, which is the nature of being of us as human beings,
Very
which ties back to what is the purpose of marriage? Why would you get married?
Very interesting. And he said protection of children. I believe so. I believe that especially in the Arab early Islamic society, if you don't know who is your father in a very patriarchal society, you're lost. So it's not right to put children in this world without giving them basic rights. But another example to think about that altogether, perhaps later, the fitrah, which is the belief in Islam that we all made as good human beings. لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ. Quran says we created the human beings on the best of gender, of how could we translate that? Based of nature. So in some societies they were adoring, like in India as well, some periods of time, not all the time, but sometimes beside crisis, they were adoring literally transsexual and transgender individuals as representatives of gods on earth. Because for them, being a man and a woman at the same time, feminine and masculine, it was very spiritual. It was a special link to nature, because you have both. You're not only one or the other. And I have a Muslim friend who is like an intergender. And I have also a participant, a friend of mine also in France, from Spanish background, converted to Islam, who is intergender. Those guys, genetically, they are men and women at the same time. It doesn't mean anything men and women, because it is also categories, like representations and so on. But they have that feminine and masculine biology in themselves, X, Y. They're not either one or the other. How could you explain that? It is said in the Quran, إِنَّا خَلَقْنَاكُم مِّن ذَكَرٍ وَأُنثَى. We created you from a man and a woman. Some people say, you see, it means that there's only man and woman that could marry. But what do we do with the people that are neither man and woman? God doesn't know that they exist. What I mean is that Quran speaks at that time and for all times to the majority. Because the reform, the justice and the alarm. Like, guys, there's a problem here about discrimination. It's coming from minority always.
Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for having come. And yes, of course. Great thanks to both our speakers for tonight, but also I was the speaker of the first lecture in the series, Denis Provencher, who is currently probably giving at this very moment a lecture in Montreal. Also, I'd like to thank a few other people for their help in the organization of this 3-day series. Jamal Bikai, Liliane Duzeroy, Elizabeth Johnstone, Miranda Swinton, Sophia Kadir, Anna Patricia Maldonado, and Paula Mauricio. And of course to our sponsors for making all of this possible, the BU Student Academic Enhancement Fund, the BU African Studies Center, the BU Study Abroad, BU Roman Studies Department, Greater Boston PFLAG, and the BU Department of International Relations. And once again, thanks to all of you for having come and making this possible.